Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about Arm of the Sphinx. This is the sequel to Senlin Ascends. I always get a little bit nervous doing reviews of sequels or books that are later on in series because it's easy to review the first book in something when you're trying to let people know if they're interested in picking up the series or not. But the further you get in the series, the more decisions you have to make as the reviewer as to how you want to handle spoilers. So in this case, I'm actually going to try to make the first few minutes of this review be completely spoiler-free. I will try not to even have spoilers for Senlin Ascends. And then maybe the second half of the video, I'll talk about some things in Arm of the Sphinx that will spoil Senlin Ascends. So if you're still thinking about whether or not you want to pick up this series and you haven't read book 1 yet, you can still watch the first part of this review. I read Senlin Ascends quite a few months ago, and I kind of hesitated going into the Arm of the Sphinx, and I think this was just one of those cases where I liked the first book so much, and I had heard that the second book was kind of different in feel, so I was a little bit nervous as to whether book 2 would be a letdown, and it really wasn't. I really enjoyed it. There are some quirkier elements of Senlin Ascends that I felt like didn't quite carry over into Arm of the Sphinx, so I personally probably did love Senlin Ascends a little bit more, but I didn't think that Arm of the Sphinx suffered at all in quality. So if you're wondering whether or not you should start this series, I can at least say that I feel like the first 2 books are really good, and I feel pretty confident that I'm going to feel the same way about book 3. I just haven't read it yet, so I can't tell you my opinion yet. Overall, the scope and story of Arm of the Sphinx feel a lot more epic. Senlin Ascends was really the story of a single person and a lot of his internal journey. And in Arm of the Sphinx, you get a lot more points of view, you learn a lot more backstory of a lot of the characters, and it's just a lot more diverse as a story. I actually really liked Senlin's point of view in the first book. He is definitely a super biased character who's not as perceptive about himself as he thinks he is, but I really related to him in a way, and I enjoyed his point of view. So I did kind of miss that tight focus in book 2, but I also really enjoyed getting to spend more time with all of these other characters that got introduced in book 1. I think if you generally enjoyed Senlin Ascends, but you didn't connect that much with Senlin himself, I think you would probably enjoy Arm of the Sphinx even more. But for me, even though Senlin is far from a perfect person, I just felt from his introduction in the first book that I really understood who he was as a character, and I just really sort of connected with him and what he was going through. And I feel like that's something that Josiah Bancroft does really well. He introduces these characters, whether it's a main character or just a side character that is in one scene and maybe will come back later. Either way, you feel like you know really quickly what this character is like, what they're about, what motivates them, and he's just really good at creating these colorful but well-defined characters. I think that's one of the best things about this world that he's created. So in this book, you do get to explore these side characters more and some of their backstories, and you start to understand what's motivating them and what their goals are. And so that does really change from the first book. But on the other hand, as much as I loved book 1, another full book of Senlin trying to accomplish his main goal probably would have been too much. I think this really was the only choice that the author could have made. In terms of style and setting, the whole thing feels a little more steampunk to me in book 2 than it did in book 1. Book 1 definitely had some steampunk elements that were, clockwork things, and I don't know, it did kind of have that steampunk gas lamp fantasy element. I've never cared too much one way or another about steampunk, but I think it really does add a lot of flavor into this world, and it just kind of adds to the quirky weirdness of this setting. We continue to explore new settings and new places in the Tower of Babel in book 2, and it's just as varied as in the first book. Josiah Bancroft definitely doesn't run out of ideas for all the different settings and things that he can throw at you as a reader. I overall really enjoy books where I have no idea what this journey is going to bring and what's going to happen next. I definitely felt that very much with this book. I think with the first one too. Sometimes in a book, you feel like you know where you are in the story. You can tell, what act you're in. You can sort of tell the shape the story is going to take. And I really didn't know in Arm of the Sphinx, and I enjoyed that a lot. I really like that feeling of, even though I can see what page I'm on in the book, it's like I just feel this sense of anticipation that I don't know what's going to happen. This book also had a killer ending that, I guess I have a lot of self-control because I haven't started book 3 yet, But man, I really wanted to continue right then and there. I think even more than the first book, I was just on the edge of my seat at the end in terms of some of the things that kind of got revealed, some of the things that happened. So yeah, definitely this one builds a lot of momentum for book 3. And I kind of have the feeling that book 3 is going to feel pretty similar to book 2 in terms of style and feel compared to book 1, which maybe is a little bit of an introduction to this world. I will also say I found both Senlin Ascends and The Arm of the Sphinx very easy to get into, but my husband is currently reading Arm of the Sphinx. He loved Senlin Ascends, but for him, he really found that both books really sucked him in and hit their stride around 30 to 40% each time. So I'm just sharing that because it's a slightly different sort of reading pace experience than what I had, but you might find that it's the case for you. I would say if you start either book and you're not 100% into it, I mean, maybe it's just not for you and that's fine, but I would recommend giving it maybe a third of the book and seeing if you start to get a little more invested. Okay, now I'm just going to get into a few things that are going to be spoilers for Senlin Ascends. So if you're watching this review and you have not read Senlin Ascends, you might want to stop here. Arm of the Sphinx starts off several months after the end of Senlin Ascends, and I know it wasn't a time skip that necessarily surprised me, but I was a little bit surprised where we were at. I don't know what I was expecting after finishing Senlin Ascends, but when the Arm of the Sphinx starts, Senlin and his friends are kind of in a place of being stuck. They've been kind of being pirates for a couple months. They are basically out of ideas for how to try to get Maria back and how to really get into Pelfia, which is the ringdom where they think that she is captive or something else, who knows. We learn in flashbacks and backstory that they had one failed attempt very early on at going straight in for the goal, and it failed pretty badly. And since then, they've been a little bit adrift. And Senlin is dealing with some other issues as well that are making him, maybe not as reliable as he could be. And there are other characters that are just dealing with the fallout of how everything happened at the end of Senlin Ascends. Obviously, Adam, who had betrayed his trust, is still, they haven't really repaired that relationship. And the other characters are just getting used to being free and sort of figuring out who they are, really, what it is they want to do. Senlin is, of course, trying his best to be the world's most civilized pirate, and he's overall probably succeeding at that, but he is also, I think, being crushed by an increasing weight of leadership and not really knowing what to do with this ship and this crew, and he's kind of starting to lose sight of his goal a little bit because he just has no idea how to proceed. So in some ways, Senlin is feeling more settled into this new life than ever, and he's kind of starting to lose sight of his goal and lose momentum, in his desire to find Maria to a certain extent, because now he's built these other friendships and he feels this responsibility to other people. And, as we know from Senlin Ascends, he's a person that takes a lot of personal responsibility and makes choices according to what he thinks is right, whether or not it's the most effective or really even best choice in its effect. He has also been suffering from these really disturbing visions or hallucinations of Maria, where she is appearing and basically tormenting him and saying horrible things to him, and it's something that nobody else can see, and he's not sure what's causing it, but he's pretty sure he's going crazy, and he doesn't want his friends to know because he's in the position of being the captain, and he doesn't want them to know he's cracking up. So I'll just talk quickly about a few things I found interesting or worth noting in Arm of the Sphinx. I will not give any spoilers for the book. I'll only be spoiling things kind of from Senlin Ascends. One of my favorite things from Senlin Ascends was the little epigraphs at the beginning of the chapter and the humor of the contrast between the guidebook that Senlin had and the reality of the Tower of Babel. I feel like that wasn't quite as good in Arm of the Sphinx. It's still there and it's still amusing and you still get some interesting information from those epigraphs, but just the absolute delight of it is not quite as extreme in this book, which is fine. It's just something that I noticed. As you can probably guess from the title, Edith's mechanical arm is a major plot point in this book. So Edith has paid an unknown price for this arm, and we know that she kind of regrets that. So that story obviously is very critical to this book and her situation, as well as the situations of other characters who might be in similar dilemmas. Basically, that gets explored in this book. Honestly, even though it's dealing with characters with disabilities, I almost didn't read it as that. To me, Edith's arm and other similar scenarios just kind of felt like an exploration of the lengths to which people will go to get something that they want and what prices they're willing to pay for that. That's been kind of a theme throughout Senlin Ascends. And of course, for Senlin, it's not so much a physical price. He's dealing with more the mental toll and a lot of moral decisions that he's had to make as he tries to find his wife. But for Edith, to a certain extent, it's a very physical thing. So while there are examples of characters with disabilities in this book, and I know disability in fantasy is something I've talked about and have been talking about more on my channel, in this case, I don't even really read this book as necessarily having examples of disabled characters in it, because I feel like it's just sort of almost a metaphor for what the characters are actually going through. And for Edith, even though the arm has given back something that she lost, it's also a constant reminder of this price that she has paid, and it's something that she knows she's always going to have to deal with that. And that's kind of, everyone has those consequences when they make a decision or make a choice that has trade-offs. It's just that for most of us, it's not literally a part of our body. And also I feel like Edith's arm and her character in general, even though she has her own really important arc, it's kind of a reminder of what Senlin went through early on during his journey through the tower and some of the choices that he made in the past and how that may have or may not have affected other people. Something I really wanted to know more about in book 1 that we don't really get in book 2 either is just I'm kind of curious about the larger world outside the Tower of Babel. The tower is still such a weird, tricky place, and you have all these people from the outside like Senlin that have heard of it coming and they fall into this whole other world really, but I kind of still want to know what normal is. This book does feel a little bit less trippy and confusing than Senlin Ascends, like I said earlier in the non-spoiler part of the review, but there's part of me that just feels like I don't fully understand where all these characters are coming from. It seems like they could come from anywhere really, and maybe that's intentional. It's not necessarily going to bother me if we never get to explore those things in the series, but I'm still just kind of curious about it because I always want to know more backstory and more world building and things like that. Even though Senlin himself takes a little bit of a backseat in this book as the other characters become more important, I really missed the flashbacks from the first book that sort of explored his relationship and his courtship with Maria. Again, I think this was totally intentional. It makes a lot of sense because he is starting to feel more and more distance from her. But in the first book, it was those flashbacks that really illustrated their relationship to me and really helped me understand the depth of his feelings and really who they were as a couple, because obviously she gets lost 5 pages in, maybe not quite, but it was pretty close to that. I definitely feel like after reading Arm of the Sphinx, you have a much better idea who the larger players are in the Tower of Babel and what's going on, what the bigger picture is, and you can see how this is going to be a 4-book series and what the scope of it is going to be. So that's really, really exciting. And honestly, it was hard not to go straight into The Hod King after I finished Arm of the Sphinx. I will probably read it this month. I am hoping to. I think I put it on my TBR, so I'm looking forward to reading that soon. This is just a really amazing series so far, and this is definitely an example of a series that I would not have known about without BookTube. And I do a lot of my own research still, and I try to find stuff on my own that I can read and hopefully bring attention to things that are lesser known. But even so, this is a series that was not on my radar. I had never heard of it before people started mentioning it, so I'm just really, really happy that this series is getting more attention. I know a lot of people have either read it or are feeling like they should read it, so I'm looking forward to continuing to hear more people's reactions to this series and seeing what people think. So thanks so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments if you've read Arm of the Sphinx already or if you're planning to and what your thoughts are, and I'll see you next time.